Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mike Steckline, partner with the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. We have a return presenter today, Kevin McNamara, who's the CEO at TIDI Products, based out of in Wisconsin. Provided a presentation 2 years ago, a really great presentation describing his experiments in leader standard work. And Kevin is a person that I really admire a lot as far as the work that he's doing to experiment in this way. And he's been very willing to share his advice and approach with other people. And so he agreed to do a follow-up webinar for us today, and I'm very grateful for that. There's some housekeeping, as is usually the case. I'll have the phones muted now. There's going to be a time later to do some Q&A, then we'll unmute it. If there's not a lot of background noise, we can keep it that way. You can always use the chat function on your computer to type in a question or a comment. We are recording this webinar so that you and others can benefit from the advice that Kevin gives in this great presentation I know that we're going to have today. A little background information. There's a number of white papers that we've written, and if you have the typical organizational chart in your mind, a pyramid with one person at the top and then a cascade of others down as the organization flows out that way. If you think about that vertical organization chart and turned it counterclockwise 90 degrees, you would be able to see something similar to this, where you have leaders, managers, frontline across the horizontal axis, customers over to the right. And thinking about this, what this would mean, where people ideally would spend their time, there's a strategic system where strategy is developed, strategy is deployed, and people in the organization monitor and evaluate that strategy. And in the ideal world, leaders such as Kevin and others who are on today's webinar would be spending a good chunk of their time thinking about that. And in the world of strategy, there's another system, which is represented by a triangle, and you can think about it as the operational or the managing for daily improvement system. And everyone has a role in that system as well, but you see the amount of time people spending in that system increases from left to right. And there is a band in the middle that we call standard work, and it's an important bridge between those two triangle systems. And there's standard work for leaders and managers. We'll call it leader standard work, and it's the topic of today's presentation that Kevin's going to be presenting. And then there's also the frontline standard work, perhaps the kind of standard work that many people are familiar with as far as the current best way to do those tasks. The bit.ly links for the various white papers that are related to this diagram are on this slide, so you can refer to the background information there. But I just wanted to give a little background information with some context to think about what Kevin's going to be talking about is really the work in that yellow band, and what is the standard work that leaders and managers can be experimenting with. Oftentimes I've been using, and I know Kevin uses the word personal management system about how that would work. So what we're going to do today is rather than view a PowerPoint presentation, what I'm going to do is turn the screen over to Kevin, and we're going to be able to view his screen, and he's going to be actually showing us some of the things that he uses, that he's experimenting with. And the transition, we experimented before we started the webinar today, and there's a little bit of a delay factor here, but I am going to turn it over to Kevin now. He can do an introduction better than I could of what he does and what his company does, and then when we get his screen up, he'll be able to walk us through his methodology. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I guess while we're thinking here, a little bit of background. And Mike, thank you again for the opportunity here. But I think the last time, last time we spoke on this topic was a couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago. I think at that point we had provided kind of a slide presentation, overview of my standard work and the link to our management system and True North and so on. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to actually show you the work. Assuming we can get the screen share to work here, I will share the work with you. As is thinking, I've been president and CEO of TIDI Products since 2005. We have been, we're a manufacturer of medical devices. We have facilities in Wisconsin, Tijuana, Mexico, China. We have about 1,700 employees, and we've been working on improvement probably since '07, I would assume. Around 2013, 2012, we adopted the Shingo framework, and I think you'll see a lot of that in the content here, and are working to try to embed the principles and underlying behaviors into our work. And I've been working on my own standard work since about 2015, and it continues to be an experiment, I would say. Absolutely continues to be an experiment. So under that umbrella today, we can keep that in context. And Mike, is the screen not? We're not.
I think we're having the same situation when we rehearse this. It's just going to take a few minutes for that screen sharing to show up. And
we haven't any success yet.
It just says waiting to view, so I think that's a function of what we've got here. Maybe it's the distance between Florida and Minnesota. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, we'll
not quite as responsive as we would like, but
yeah. Okay, and so I'll just continue to try and frame this, but I think the work that you'll see I'm going to share with you today is actually my work, and it's my workbooks and notes and template that I use to guide the work. We've extended that work at least 2 levels down into our organization, so I can show you examples of other leaders in our organization, their standard work, and it's kind of similar and cascades from mine. And I would say that pretty much everything we're doing has evolved organically since the 2018 seminar on this topic. So a substantial number of changes have been made, hopefully improvements in that period of time as well as we try and build improvement into the process. So
we're still waiting.
Still not seeing the landing page here.
We're not panicking yet.
That's easy for you to say, Mike.
Oh, it's all good.
All right. How about
now? We're now seeing what you're sharing, Kevin. So it just took a little time.
All right. Good. So let me management system on the screen.
That's correct.
All right. Good. Thanks. Right, so what this is actually, we use OneNote. We use OneNote as a tool. It's not the system. It's just a tool, and it's where we kind of capture and manage the PDCA of all of this. So the page you're seeing right now is, I don't know, it's my personal landing page, if you will. And the way it's structured, on the left, those are the notebooks I share with other leaders or other systems. All those notebooks are kind of on the left here, and you can scroll down, there are more. This is my personal landing page. Those sections across the top are just the way I segment my work. And then to give you an example of this is where it all starts for me in terms of the basis. I would say everything we do and continue to do is in the context of what our True North is as an organization. So this is our artifact on True North. Purpose of the company is to support caregivers and protect patients. And the work that we're doing is really try to link the work of all 1,700 employees with our purpose. We've adopted, kind of our core beliefs or values, and then the guiding principles and those underlying behaviors into this visual. And I believe the embracing and modeling of those, both beliefs and behaviors, will continue to just give us the highest probability of being successful. So I think about the context of my standard work of my management system, the elements and the systems that are captured there are aligned with and embedded with, in many instances, both our core values as well as our guiding principles. We continue to guide the work by an X matrix, and this is our kind of draft version to be firmed up of our enterprise strategy and our X matrix. These are the long-term strategy plans. You see the 12 o'clock. And as I think about the work that's captured in my management system, it is absolutely directly linked and line of sight to those plans, those strategy plans that are on our X matrix. So if I think about my system and the systems where I interact with other leaders and so on down the organization, we are very much focused on linking the work and driving the work that is associated with the X matrix. This is just a visual of our management system and the elements of our management system. And I think the important one is, for all of us, the supporting management systems, standard work is one of the absolute components that we require in our organization. And it really helps us to continue to be aligned, if you will. This is the page where, and I have a shared page where this work is shared with maybe 25 or 30 of our top leaders. So I'll show you that in a moment, where all of them, this is kind of like the public bulletin board, if you will. All of them know exactly what, if any, changes or adjustments I'm making to my personal management system. So one of the refinements we've made probably since last time we spoke was we thought about, okay, what's the purpose? If there's a purpose here, and how do we link the work that's in our management system to purpose? For me, it's the words here. It's an accountability to where I should be investing my time, and we would say greatest value is customers, and for us, EBITDA, profit. Okay, and the test is it aligned with the purpose of the X matrix? There's an accountability here that holds me and others accountable for their personal development or transformation, and that really deals with modeling the behaviors. Okay, and then as I work on my own transformation, and there's evidence of that in my relationships and systems with my direct reports, there's also an accountability to expect and then support their transformation as well and their behaviors. So as we think about, this is how I think about the purpose of my management system. If you look back, and I could show you my 2016 leader standard work that I've just kind of kept over here to the right. The problem statement then was that the CEO lacks standard work as well as a commitment to continuous improvement. So there's been a lot of evolution from that original plan and where we are today. What this today plan does not represent is the inventory of everything I'm involved with. It represents, for me, it's the distilled and focused list of activities or systems that create value. Okay, really important. It's not the inventory of everything that I'm involved with. It is the focused list of where I'm choosing to invest my time, linked to purpose, X matrix, where it has the greatest impact on the enterprise. So it's a really important point that we've made those adjustments over the last couple of years. One of the things I like to do is, and you'll see it later, is we continue to ask ourselves, hey, like, what are your top 3 priorities? Are those top 3 priorities kind of linked to what's in our X matrix? So this is my 3 priority statement, if you will, for Q1 and Q2 of this year. To everybody who has access to this page, and probably every meeting I have an opportunity to reinforce, I remind them that these are the top 3 priorities that I'm focused on as the CEO. Because as I go to Gemba and look and observe other systems one of the things I'm trying to do is understand that link and how mine and the enterprise's priorities kind of link to the actual work. So these are three, supporting and equipping our health systems and patient safety teams. Our patient safety business, some of you may recognize those brands. Those are the POSI product brands, POSI products, alarms, sensors, gate belts, patient handling, and so on. And one of my key priorities there is some of those major group purchasing organization contracts will roll over in the next 18 to 24 months, is to support and equip the people guiding that work. We made a transition in our sales leadership role late last year, and I'm in the process of a second priority of recruiting a new sales leader. You'll see those adjustments in my management system. And we continue to be focused on acquisition as one of our key priorities. So one of the things I try and do is be very, very clear with everybody what I'm focused on and why, and it's linked to the X matrix. This is the actual template that I use, and I'll see if I can't can't focus that a little bit. One of the things that I want to just use as a frame of reference is I started tracking in late 18 adjustments that I was making to this management system, and I'm in version 27 right about now. So I think you'll get a sense of the word that Mike uses all the time is organic evolution, And those 27 cycles have been learning and adjustment, PDCA, learning and adjustment. This is I kind of branded this as my management system, and there are other systems listed here. And the critical part about these other systems is every single one of them has their own standard work. And I'll show you some of that standard work as we move through. But every single system listed here, and I'm gonna spend some time on reflection. I'll spend some time in our support and accountability meetings. I want to show you the standard work that supports those systems. Because at the end, all of these systems tend to be linked with one another, and focused on PDCA and just trying to get better, trying to improve. Okay. What I've done kind of visually here is my personal development used to be at the bottom. Like when I ran out of things to do, I used to kind of focus on myself. And I think if you're really committed to leading and setting expectation for culture and behaviors, that has to be led, and that the executives need to model that behavior. And I firmly believe, as a lot of really smart people believe, that you can't expect people to change or tell them to change without there being strong evidence that you are working on changing yourself. You can't lead change without modeling that you are also committed to change. And in my instance, what I'm really focused on in that change process and transformation process is my behaviors. And those are the underlying behaviors that generally support all of the Shingo principles. Okay. One that we've been working on recently on a very focused basis is listed below, respect for every individual. And one of my key responsibilities, and we have content that we develop that supports that, is to communicate and reinforce our commitment and modeling of respect for every individual in our organization. And we've been working that on a very consistent basis since the third quarter of last year. Okay. Reflection is a system. So I'm also a believer in that difficult to improve if you don't have a standard. Also difficult to improve if you don't take the time to do a check and adjust. And I think it's very difficult, even with the discipline of asking people for feedback, I think it's very difficult to get candid feedback from people that work for you in the CDO role. Okay, and I tell my organization that probably the only person in my life that really gives me unfiltered feedback, and sometimes that's whether I want it or not, is my spouse, and I think that's probably true. But I use reflection as a system to evaluate my behaviors and think about how I need to modify or improve those. So what I'll do is I'm just gonna pop over here. I think this will track. So this is the shared notebook that I have shared with 25 or 30 people in our organization, key leaders, so they can understand changes and adjustments I'm making. This is my standard work. Okay, so this is my own personal standard work that I've laid out here for all of them also to note what changes or adjustments I might be making in my standard work. So then they know exactly what to expect if I'm going to come to Gemba or conduct a support and accountability meeting, which I'll show you. Okay, this is my standard work for reflection, and so each of these standard work pages has a purpose, and the purpose is personal reflection in a structured time, and the focus is on changing myself in thinking about behaviors. Okay, and I also use that structured time to think about my relationships and communication with my direct reports, and some of that insight gets carried over into support and accountability meetings with them. So the behavior, which is one of the underlying behaviors of the principles, is discipline reflection. I have a definition of it for me. It's personal transformation. Am I modeling the ideal behaviors? And if I'm not modeling the ideal behaviors, I can't expect others to model those behaviors as well. Okay? I've defined what the ideal conditions are for me. It's quiet time, home, office, travel. Does not include driving, shaving, shower, or any other activities. It's focused. The rules are I journal every single time that I reflect. I journal, and I always work to conclude with like who, what, when, where, why, how much. What am I going to do next? And I'm going to commit to follow through on at least one concrete adjustment as a result of that insight. If you gain insight and do nothing with it, waste. Okay? Cadence is 90 minutes a week. It's committed to on my calendar, and it's highlighted in a particular color as a visual cue for me. And then the assessment that I'm trying to do in terms of like how am I progressing? Am I improving? The self-diagnostic is done through the spider diagram self-assessment, which many of you may be familiar with. And I also have committed discipline to a quarterly review of the trends, an annual review, and a sharing of that feedback with direct reports to get more feedback cycle going, which I'll show you. Okay, I'm responsible. This standard work was last revised in early January, and I think it's version 8 essentially. So this has been adjusted 8 times over the 2+ years that we've been using reflection as a system. So I'm going to go back. I do not share this with broad scale public. This is back to my page. This is back to my landing page, my personal page for me only. So this is a pretty typical journal of reflection, and which is done weekly. And the thing for me is I always kind of have a tendency to highlight, okay, like what's the evidence of those actual discussions? The next steps, for me were to go see that evidence. And then, the next steps down below are, what do we do? We're having our national sales meeting in a couple of weeks. How should I think about more fully developing my communication and the underlying delivery of that communication linked to the behaviors? And in this instance, the theme of the meeting is value for customers. Okay. So this is a pretty typical journal entry, if you will. Reflect, journal, do something. If I slide down, sorry for the fast twitch here on the screen. At the end of every quarter, what I will do, part of the standard work, I'll review those 13 weeks of reflections, reflection notes. I'll look for keywords. I'll look for themes. I'll look for gaps. I'll look for summaries, just to get a real sense of what have I been working on? Are we making progress? What are the future gaps? What work lies ahead of me here for continued reflection and or adjustments? Okay, so this is my Q4 summary. You'll see, this health systems bullet at the bottom, which I was working on over Q4. This must do, can't fail for the enterprise. That's why it's at the top of my list. Okay, this reflects adjustments that I made to my management system as a result of the change in my sales leadership role, which forced me to adjust management system, and you'll see those series of adjustments. How this reflection plays out into other systems, I would say, Jeff is one of my operations leaders. What I'll do at the end of every quarter is share that quarterly reflection with my direct reports, and I'll just paste it into their support and accountability meeting. It's a shared page that we have, which I'll get to the SAMs in a moment. It's a shared page, and so I'll share that reflection with my leaders and ask them for feedback. And sometimes that feedback will come back in the way of written notes before our accountability meeting, which is the blue highlight on this chart. Those are Jeff's comments. The black is mine, the blue is Jeff's. And it will always be an agenda item of our support and accountability meeting as appropriate. And you can see one of the things now, we've gotten into a nice cadence where now my leaders are also sharing their quarterly reflection in me. And it's just a great example of humility. It's a great example of building trust and openness. And it's really done terrific wonders to help us to continue to be aligned as we think about the underlying behaviors. Okay, so that's kind of reflection system, if you will, and there's a feedback loop that takes place individually and collectively as I think about how am I doing relative to my reflection system and my modeling the appropriate behaviors. The next area I would say in terms of a system would be our support and accountability meetings, the SAMs. We used to call them catchpole meetings 2 years ago because our significant focus was building consensus and alignment using the catchpole discipline or tool to build alignment. And we made the adjustment to the support and accountability meetings, or SAMs, after about 2 years, because at the time we were convinced, we got pretty good alignment here. We know we're going to come back to check on that alignment and reconfirm the alignment, but we're gonna kind of rebrand them because there's a component of our management system that I showed earlier that's standard work, and support and accountability meetings are an important component of the overall management system, whether that be quarterly, weekly, monthly, daily, or hourly management if necessary. So we rebranded them as SAMs. We have These are my leaders. These are the leaders who report to me. I've got SAMs with each of them. Depending upon the leader, some of those are twice a month. Some of those are weekly in shorter periods of time. But we have standard work for our support and accountability meetings, and they are checks. So just think about them as checks to the management system and behavior. The standard work for our support and accountability meetings is here in our shared OneNote. Purpose of that standard work is a check in coaching on personal management systems and leadership behaviors. The cadence, adjusted by individual, is 90 to 120 minutes as needed. When we started with our catchball meetings 3 years ago, we were scheduling between 2 and 2.5 hours just on discussion with coaching and support. When we got those meetings down to about 30 minutes, we knew it was time to migrate from working on alignment to working on the enable portions of the principles. So we made that adjustment, okay? The content is, it could be a review of their management systems, their behaviors, a discussion of their reflection, and always the link between purpose and X matrix. And we do a lot of work in these meetings about how are we equipping and supporting leaders. These are standard work questions that are built in to these support and accountability meetings. With the direct report relationships I've had in place now for 3 years, most of the questions for us revolve around enabling. You know, what insight have you gained? What evidence exists you're changing yourself? How are you equipping people? Okay. For the new reporting relationships I have as a result of the leader transition, I'm back to questions that we were asking as leaders 18 months ago, which was alignment. How can we use this time? What systems are you working on? What are your top 3 priorities? Are you planning and preparing? Okay. So these questions, there's a standard, but there's flexibility in terms of where the focus is on these discussions, and it really depends on the individual and where they may be in the organization, or what the reporting relationships might look like. Okay, but there is a standard. We've tried to identify the behaviors that we should be using in these meetings, and here are the best practices. And the respectful part is, let's be organized. Let's be clear on what the agenda is in advance. Let's make sure that everybody understands the purpose, okay? And then by the way, if and as needed, we also agree on who does what by when in terms of the follow-up, okay? So what this might look like for me, again, is I would say, so this is one of our other leaders, and I would say I would look at her. I don't know. This is maybe. Let's see if I can go over to support and accountability tab. Let's say here's the January. Here's our January discussion with our marketing leader. Okay, and then there's a little bit of housekeeping here, a little bit of housekeeping in this, but then this is all. Hey, let's talk about the changes we just made and the whys. And I'd ask you to consider, does this create capacity? Does this improve alignment? How does this support you and your team? Okay. So these are dynamic. These notes in here with nothing to the right, those are my original questions. This would be Jennifer's comments back to me in advance of the meeting. And it's just a great example of, we got a really, really clear agenda, and we have great clarity on who does what by when. Okay. So typical meeting notes in terms of, hey, in this instance, thanks for your advanced preparation. These are just really thoughtful updates about supporting and then equipping the leaders in the organization, to be able to lead and drive improvement. Okay. So I think that's a pretty typical. We have, I have support and accountability meetings with every single one of these leaders on a monthly basis, and they're all captured on a tab in our shared OneNote together. And we tend to ruthlessly 5S quarters and time frames other than current and prior. We've been pretty ruthless here with 5S to make sure we don't build up, I guess, the space junk or space balls, as Mike would say. Okay. So those are support and accountability meetings. The tab for each of my leaders looks the same. We're using the same template. This is CFO, okay? Communication, support and accountability meeting documents. This is one of my new sales leader relationships, communication, support and accountability documents. This is communication documents. This is one of our coaches. And I would say the format is important because what we try and do with this documents tab is just we put documents in there that we want to discuss as part of our support and accountability meetings. And the standard work is, if you want to discuss something and there's a document attached to it, then it should be in our shared OneNote at least 3 days prior to the meeting. So that if I'm going to insert the document that we want to review, or the leader inserts the document, we're demonstrating respect by giving each other time to read and be thoughtful about the agenda and the preparation required for that agenda. Okay, so that would be support and accountability meetings within the framework of the management system. All right. I'm gonna just touch on Gemba, and then I think I'll stop for questions. The caveat for like all of you are, one, I've been working on this since 2000, late 2015, 2016. So the organization and the discipline or habit you see here has just evolved and been adjusted over time. Right? My counsel to leaders in my organization as we cascade this down is, do not replicate what I'm doing. Okay. So it has got to work for you personally. And once you get started with your own experiment, it will evolve organically. Okay? So don't replicate. It has to work for you. It has to evolve organically. Okay? If there was one piece of counsel that I would provide, I guess it would be that. Okay? The last system that I'll talk about is Gemba. And again, this is my definition of Gemba for me, which is different for different roles and different functions in our organization. This is mine. And the purpose for me, go observe, listen, learn, and ask questions. Acknowledge contributions, effort, and accomplishments. Recognize that. Recognize the effort. Don't be a tourist. Be organized and make sure that if you're going to Gemba, whether it be a meeting or a work with, the standard work, it says you always, everybody in that meeting should have great clarity on what the purpose of my attendance or involvement is. Okay? Don't be a tourist. So here's a definition for me. It might be a sales meeting, it might be a regional meeting, it might be a customer I work with. Okay. We always confirm the purpose. Right? Most oftentimes with groups of employees, I will begin these meetings and any content I have with an overview of our content around respect for every individual. Okay, and I will always ask for feedback. These are model behaviors. Here are the do's. Questions of sheer curiosity are really important. In many organizations, if you're a leader and you're asking questions in Gemba that somebody maybe 2 or 3 levels down might feel compelled to answer, or maybe they don't know the answer to, that could be very uncomfortable. So one of the things that I do in those situations I always review this standard to say, hey, not my intention to catch people doing something wrong. I'm seeking insight as to whether we have the systems in place and have equipped you properly to improve the business. Okay? So these are the do's. The list of don'ts is a little bit shorter, but probably more important. Don't try and coach a level down. Don't sugarcoat feedback, open, honest, and don't assign more work. You know, as a C-suite officer or CEO, whatever your role might be, even just a suggestion could be inferred as, hey, let's go do that because it was suggested during the meeting. What I find myself doing is saying, hey, this is an observation. Don't do anything with that. Okay. My counsel will always be, let's build on the improvement work that's already underway. You don't need more to do. Okay. And so we're big believers in the preparation of this. And this is just some of the framework in terms of the pre-work that takes place for Gemba, alignment with the meeting owner, the agenda, reconfirming purpose, share that purpose with the attendees. So there absolutely are no surprises. Right? This is a management system. My commitment after Gemba is to provide concrete feedback via OneNote primarily, concrete feedback on where I observed opportunities to either equip the people or improve the systems or identify a gap in the systems that they should consider getting close. Okay? So that is how that works itself into a feedback loop. Okay. So I'll stop there. I think I know that's a kind of a quick page flip of a number of pages, but I think I'll just stop there and maybe entertain any questions if anybody has any.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. I am unmuting the phones and I'll be listening for any background noise that I might have to mute people. So are there questions from anyone that's on the call, or would you like to put something in the chat function?
Again, I've got my overview of my what is leader standard work, and I've got Gemba, title, reflection.
All right. I'm going to try that again. I'm going to unmute everyone and see.
My last month Gemba, I look at my tab, I tab out my next month Gemba, the wall walk, and that's really helped me because.
Okay, I had background noise there, so I had to unmute everyone. So if you do have questions, just type it on the chat function and Kevin will respond. I couldn't isolate that noise. Fozzie asked, do you have dedicated time to do all these activities?
Yes. Is my screen still up, Mike? I don't know if
yes, your screen is still up, Kevin.
I'm still in control here. Huh? So here's just so I would say this is a calendar view, and so what I've done, and I didn't really mention this in my template, but I just color coded my management system is like it is I don't know, it's sequenced, if you will. So anything that's in gold is part of our enterprise management system. So this is our executive leadership team weekly meeting. Anything that's in green is planning and preparation for either support and accountability meetings. Oh, Mike, there it is. I was actually prepared for. I worked at preparing for this meeting last week on my calendar. Anything that's in purple is a support and accountability meeting. Okay. And then anything that is in blue is travel or Gemba. Mm-hmm. So what I've tried to do is really just these color coding for me is it's a visual cue, if you will. Anything that's red is an enterprise commitment. All right. And I've tried to do color coding of my calendar so I can glance visually to understand if I'm investing my time in the future so that it's linked to my management system. And I would say my goal is to commit approximately 20% of my time or 1 day a week to planning and preparation, which a lot of this planning and preparation I just highlight in green. And this is the proxy, this is the placeholder for me as to when I do my reflection. This is my placeholder for reflection, which is in silver, that part of my management system.
Okay, that's great. And there was a follow-up question that Fozzie asked as an example, such as a no meeting zone. And I know some organizations have tried to declare, look, there's this time of day when we're just not going to have meetings, and that's when people are supposed to be doing improvement work. So it sounds like with you, everyone that does have their personal management system will use their calendar accordingly to dedicate specific time for specific things.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. We have multi-sites, multi-office locations, and not every functional area is in one location. So I think the no meeting time is kind of just difficult for us to just manage.
Mm-hmm.
I could show you a year's worth of discussion in my support and accountability meetings with my direct reports on whether or not they are taking the time, what's the evidence that they're committing the time to reflection,
Mm-hmm.
and then what's the evidence that they're also carving time for planning and preparation.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing topic and accountability for us. But my target is about 20% of my time on planning and prep.
That's great. Tom has a question that says, what would you suggest or coach on the best place to start for someone to develop their personal system?
Yeah, so I think the place you almost have to start is first. I guess it depends on what your reporting relationship is in the organization. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is work or priorities or objectives that have kind of already been prescribed for you because you're in the management function, and maybe not a leadership function, I would think the place you'd want to start in that instance with lining up any of these tools you might feel comfortable with, whether it's support and accountability meetings or whatever it might be. I think you'd want to line it up with whatever the priorities are for your role in your organization at that particular point in time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be different. It might be different. And the closer you get to work, Mike, as you prescribed in the first couple of slides, I think you have less flexibility to determine where you're going to start. But I would say the starting point for managers would be what's important, what are the top 3 priorities of your leader, what's the organization strategies, what's your role in that, what processes are you responsible for. I think those are a different series of questions, and maybe the focus is different if you're in the C-suite, as an example.
I think that makes good sense. Kathy has a question. What do you see as optimal frequency for doing Gemba walks on unit departments? And are you actually observing work in the process or asking folks to talk about their improvement work? So it's a question of frequency, and then what are you doing?
Yeah, so for me is I don't know the answer to that. I think the people that are closest to that Gemba would have much better insight on what an appropriate cadence or frequency might be. Mm-hmm. I can say that if you look at just my management system in particular, one of the things as we reflect on learning, adjusting, I can tell you without a single exception, we have gone in and adjusted this frequency on an as needed basis. So if that particular area has significant gaps, I might suggest the cadence of Gemba is more frequent than not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really depends on that on what the situation is in that particular area where Gemba might be focused.
Yeah. And the second part of her question was, when you're there, are you observing and watching, or are you asking people to talk about their improvement work, or is it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll say it really depends on the meeting. So, for example, if I'm with a group of sales leaders and there are region managers, maybe 2 levels down from me, updating, the progress of initiatives, I'll observe and I may ask questions, seeking clarity or seeking information. But I think the real discipline is not to try and direct or coach more than 1 level down.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you observe or believe that there are gaps, you may want to ask a few more questions to try and gain insight into those gaps, so that you can provide that individual's supervisor that concrete feedback later.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm not sure if that totally answers that specific question, but at least that's how I think about it.
That sounds like it makes a lot of sense. There's a question here: is there a process for frontline coworkers to view their leaders' standard work? Perhaps similar to the transparency you have as far as everyone can see your standard work.
There is, and I don't know that we've established that as a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that's been established as a requirement or an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really great question, though.
Yeah. Okay. Sue has a question. You referred to a spider diagram, what it looks like, and said, could we see what your spider diagram looks like? I know that you shared that when you did your webinar 2 years ago.
Yep. So, yes. Can you see the screen here, Mike?
Yeah, you're still on, Kevin. You're still.
All right, good. Yeah, so this is just for, this is helpful for me. So these are all of the spider diagram assessments I've done since 2015. Okay, so I've kind of just been keeping track of those, and I would say, so here's the recent tracker, and the standard is I do this at mid-year and I do this at the end of the year. And one of the things I didn't show you is I will also share this mid-year assessment and end of the year assessment with my direct reports and SAM discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Gain their insight. Okay. And now this is a little bit of a moving target for me, because I would say this the time frame here, I looked at the first one. The orange is the first one I did in June of 2015. Right. And the blue is the one I did at year end 19. So so these spider diagrams is your perception of yourself, if you will. Right. My perception is I'm making progress. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I would just, there's a couple caveats here. I will say I'm making progress on like leader standard work as an example. That's an easy one because I didn't have any the first time I took the spider diagram. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and I would say after 3 years of reflection, I feel reasonably comfortable that my reflection and my assessment of my own reflection capabilities in terms of, am I modeling that behavior at a level 5 behavior? Mm-hmm. I feel pretty comfortable that I'm actually setting that standard. Okay. I think as I think about self-discipline as an example, I think there's probably 3 years of evidence of this management system evolving that might suggest that I have some reasonable levels of self-discipline. Now, I would just be cautious with these spider diagrams because we're in the process of doing a deeper dive of the underlying behaviors supporting the Shingo principles. Mm-hmm. And I think as you gain more insight on each of these underlying behaviors in terms of what good really looks like, that has that more robust insight has a tendency to think about maybe evaluating yourself a little bit differently through a different lens as you gain that insight.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's very helpful. And for those that are on the call today or anybody listening to the recording, I can remember back when we were together, Kevin, in Florida, and Carl Hoover was one of the people leading the discussion, and he had experimented with the idea of taking the approach of assessing behaviors and applying it to a personal perspective. And it was Carl's work that led to the production of this approach for
Yep.
self-reflection, and also for people who wanted to
Yep.
request feedback and comparison with trusted um, direct reports, kind of like
Yep.
in a 360 approach. So if anybody
Exactly.
wants to learn more about that, we could dig into that a little bit more. I think, Kevin, you and your group are good examples of someone that started with that tool, made it your own, and have really leveraged it nicely.
I'll tell you that the one thing that we've done, Mike, and it just kind of like occurred to us is as we now what we begin to do these 1231 adjustments down here.
Mm-hmm.
What we've begun to do is, okay, if we did this 6 months ago, what's changed? If our assessment of ourself is different than it was 6 months ago, what's the root cause, or what's the influencer of that change?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to begin to capture that insight. I don't know where it'll lead us, but we're going to begin to capture that insight, though. Which,
Yeah, I really like. I'm very curious to see what you do with that, because I think it is important that people make an attempt to try to figure out
you know,
causal factors. It isn't always linear, but it could be modulating factors that have a higher impact. So I think that's beneficial. Well, Kevin,
yep,
thanks again for sharing. What I'm going to do
yep,
is make me the presenter again, so that I can transition to our next steps here.
right,
And again, thank you for taking the time to
yep,
put this together. As far as what happens next, the recording for this webinar gets placed on our website, so you can see what's happening, and then we have a place for previous events, so it'll be there. It's also going to be sent to everyone who participated. So the great work and great advice that Kevin has provided is going to be available for others who wish to share. What's coming up next, actually next week, there's a webinar, interesting approach. Hank Bucella, who was with the Cleveland Clinic, is now doing some work with Rush University Medical Center in Chicago on a system that can connect the work that emergency rooms are doing to help signal what they need to be doing to help move process flow, patient flow through, and it's very interesting work that Hank and his team are going to be sharing. Just talked yesterday with a friend and colleague, Dr. Paul Deschamps, who has done a lot of work and learned a lot about physician burnout, but I think it'll apply for burnout in any profession. And so on March the 6th, Paul has agreed to share his current thinking on what he's learning and the advice he's giving around burnout. And again, it was primarily started with physicians, but I think it can apply to other professions as well. In March, later on, I'm going to be doing a webinar to review and bring up some of the things that I've been learning relative to understanding and managing complexity. This has to do with building on what I've learned with the Cynefin sense-making framework. And so I'm putting some things together. We'll have a review about lessons learned with that in March. Jason Schulist, who works also out of the Wisconsin area in Appleton, is going to talk about generativity using adaptive problem solving on thorny community problems. That's April the 10th. And then there's another number of topics that are in the works. They haven't evolved into final presentation or dates, but we're always looking for opportunities for people to share stories and to learn different things from each other. And today's experiment was to see how screen sharing would go by a presenter showing personally what their screen works. The delay wasn't too bad. I think we made it through there. So Kevin, I think good experiment today. I think that was great. And again, I thank you again for taking the time to put it together. And I know that you're interested in any feedback anyone may have for your own improvements. So if people want to give any thoughts on that, they can share it. And I'll just leave it that we are now at 1 hour into this, so the timing worked out really well. And I hope everyone has a good day and a good weekend coming up. And Kevin, thanks again for taking the time to do this. This was great.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. Yep. Appreciate the time. Thank you again.
All right. Take care.